sometimes when kids are too mature for their age, we think it's a good thing, but it's actually not, because there might be a lot of bottled up emotions inside, which will come out as anxiety and depression later on. There's silent struggles, difficulty expressing discomfort for asking for help. Asking for help is so essential. We raise our kids. I just was watching this very heartbreaking video of a little girl who went through molestation, and her dad was saying that she didn't ask for help because she wanted to be strong. Imagine the kind of things that we teach our kids. So asking for help is so important. And you can only teach them this when their emotions are let out in the open. So then the shame goes away, and then they feel confident to ask for help. They feel confident to fight injustice. They feel confident to cry, ask for help, So it's very important to teach them the skill that I'm teaching you today. What happens when kids suppress their emotions? And this definitely is true for adults too. There's sleep issues and issues like psychosomatic issues like headaches, cramps, muscle pains. It's all there. When you suppress your emotions, you feel all these things. You can get physically sick as well, right? Migraines are also very common. There's increased anxiety and depression. There's outbursts and shutdowns and tantrums. You have kids who just withdraw and don't talk to you for days. You have kids who just retaliate. There's so much outbursts. Teenagers are more prone to rebel and get into activities that are not ideal. So it's all suppression of emotions. The kind of things that we're dealing with right now. I'm not sure if you've watched this very recent Netflix series called Adolescence. It's just heartbreaking what kids are watching these days and what our societal systems are doing to kids. Because for some context to the show, it was a show about a teenage boy who murdered a girl. So yeah, and it was a 13-year-old teenage boy, and they showed the entire therapeutic process. And it was a systemic issue, and I wouldn't even blame the child, because the child never learned how to process and share his emotions. So what do you expect from a child? These outbursts would happen, and I'm not surprised that this happens. It's heartbreaking. So it also can lead to low academic performance, risk of bullying, low self-esteem, emotional numbness, difficulties with friendship, lack of creativity. It's incredibly sad. All right, it's pretty heavy issues if this very simple skill is not taught. Yeah, these are some more specific examples. The first one is something that I really struggled with. It's fear of being judged and struggling to ask questions in class. I was so ashamed of asking questions, and I was so ashamed of telling my parents that I don't ask questions in class. And that continued into my adulthood. And I really had a lot of problems with teachers, especially, in India, right now, asking questions and all is encouraged. But when I was in the US, I was specifically told by my teachers that I don't ask questions, and that's why I don't have this grade. So not asking questions actually impacted my grade. It's so hard just to ask questions, So something that I really struggled with, and I still sometimes struggle with. So there's also inability to set boundaries, saying yes when they mean no, avoidance of leadership and in social situations. So there's fear of group work and presentations. This is so heartbreaking, holding in tears. becoming overly quiet or too well behaved. Sometimes when kids are too mature for their age, we think it's a good thing, but it's actually not, because there might be a lot of bottled up emotions inside, which will come out as anxiety and depression later on. Then there's silent struggles, difficulty expressing discomfort for asking for help. Asking for help is so essential. We raise our kids. I just was watching this very heartbreaking video of a little girl who went through molestation, and her dad was saying that she didn't ask for help because she wanted to be strong. Imagine the kind of things that we teach our kids. So asking for help is so important, and you can only teach them this when their emotions are let out in the open. So then the shame goes away, and then they feel confident to ask for help. They feel confident to fight injustice. They feel confident to cry, ask for help. So it's very important to teach them the skill that I'm teaching you today. Struggling to talk to authority figures, teachers, about what they're doing, or they struggle to talk to authority figures. There's bottled up emotions, sudden angry outbursts over small triggers like losing something, or like someone's not responding to them. Loss of self-identity, becoming a people pleaser to fit in. Through social media, like this people pleasing and fitting into this one look or personalities is just getting out of hand right now with Gen Zs and Gen Alphas. Yeah, these are some very, very heartbreaking statistics. 23.33% of school-going kids have mental health issues, like prevalence of clinical mental health issues. Need clinical help. Anxiety is at 3.6%. Depression is 14.2%, and it's more in girls than boys. So yeah, it's heartbreaking. Yeah, ADHD is or neurodivergence is something that is not really diagnosed in schools, often misdiagnosed as anxiety or depression, but then there's an underlying issue of neurodivergence disability that even psychologists ignore. So then the child absolutely gets ignored and nobody knows what's really wrong with them. Then these are called hidden disabilities, which don't really see the light. Why does all this matter? This is in general why this matters, and I've spoken a lot on what happens when you name the emotion, how the brain kind of calms down, what happens when you model. So this improves emotional awareness, empathy. When they name their own feelings, they kind of sense and empathize with what others are going through. They can understand feelings. They can differentiate between feelings. They can themselves diagnose what the underlying feeling is. Why are they feeling angry? Because they're ashamed. So they get better at sensing that there are two sort of emotions going on. So they sense that, okay, like this is why the cause and effect kind of gets better. Managing big feelings gets better. Social and academic benefits. The academic performance increases. Long-term emotional resilience and mental well-being increases. Your kids will not need you if you teach them. They will not need you as much in their adulthood, and that should be your goal as a parent, because you want to live more independently, right? You want your kids to have their own independent lives. So yeah, so that should be your goal. Your own emotional independence and your child's emotional independence should be your goal. So language and how it shapes emotions. This is also something that's very clear to you after we did the entire affect labeling thing. So we have a lot of language areas. Actually, language is spread across in the brain. It's kind of localized on the left side. So there's Broca's and Wernicke's areas. But that theory is also being we have more expansive research as to language being present like in many parts of the brain. Right. So language shapes emotion. If you don't label it, if you don't have language for that emotion, you won't understand what you're feeling. Right. So the vocabulary needs to be taught. Just like other vocabularies, this language of emotions needs to be taught. Right. So children who can name their feelings are more likely to regulate them, right? So if you know what's happening, like if you know, like if you can name it, like there's a fan and the fan is rotating, right? If you can name, okay, there's fear and it's making me feel horrible. If you can name that, you know how to deal with it, right? You know how to change your situation and go to a place where you don't feel afraid, you feel safe. So that's how it works. Yeah, emotional vocabulary helps children make sense of the internal chaos. Earlier, the children learn to identify emotions, stronger their lifelong emotional resilience, because this works like a muscle. The more you name emotions, the more neural pathways develop in your brain, right? So it just fast tracks your emotional resilience over time. So examples of our evidence-based creative interventions so far, we've done some very creative things. So we've done something called the Emotion Project, where we have studied about 100 participants, and the way we did it is we asked them to draw in these little squares, to draw their emotions, to describe their emotions. So in this, the participant has described it, and it's nostalgia. And then we also ask them to map it, like how positive or negative is the emotion, how calm or intense do you feel, how small or big do you feel. So dominance is a very interesting scale. So what we found was women feel less dominant than men. Men feel the most dominant. And women, even if they have like such good articulation skills and such good careers and confidence and everything, but they still end up feeling smaller than men. It's the effect of a patriarchal society. So the next one is the anxiety, and I've basically depicted my anxiety. So in the project as well, we asked the participants to sculpt one of their emotions that they'd like to explore, and we gave them clay. So I actually carry it. This is my anxiety, right? So sometimes it's pokey, sometimes I feel like it's beating me up, sometimes it's like fire, and sometimes it's like, it just wants me to sleep and just take a nap, right? So what I've changed, and what clinically we do as speech pathologists, is externalizing a feeling or externalizing an idea. We do this a lot with people who stutter, because the language is sort of I'm a stutterer, I'm a stammerer is something that they come with in the clinic. So I'm a stammerer. So so there's some work in like externalizing this stutter. In my case, like I used to be like, I'm anxious, I'm an anxious person, but I'm not. It's I have anxiety and I can see it. There are some causes of my anxiety. There are some places where I feel more anxious. There are some people who I feel more anxious with. I'm not an anxious person. I'm Apramita. So then, like, sculpting this and looking at it kind of helps you externalize the feeling. It helps you see the feeling, just like, and it's also tactile. You can also sense the feeling. So it's a little pokey, and that's how it feels in my body. So it's a very interesting, it just takes affect labeling to the next level. It adds a more visual and tactile dynamic to it. And that's why design and illustration and visual language is also very important to understand emotions, because the brain learns better when the instruction or when the content is multimodal. There's some visual element, auditory element. So in the Emotion Project, Trishant is going to do something that we've planned is mapping emotions with soundscapes, because he's a voice person. He does throat singing. So he is going to look at emotions in sounds. What does fear sound like? What does anxiety sound like? So that's also a very interesting multimodal angle to it. We did this with kids as well. So it's very interesting what they've drawn as emotions. So I want you all to take inspiration from the interventions that we've done, and feel free to, use it in either your clinical practice, schools, anywhere that you work. Yeah, this is a very interesting thing that we did. On the right, if you can see, it's a data visualization map. So this is from a storytelling session that we did. It was called Patchwork Quilt, where this granny from Ladakh talks to her patches that she sews in her quilts, and she says, okay, you are strong, you are beautiful. And because the patches are kind of insecure, the jeans patch is insecure that I don't have any color, the plain white patch is saying that I don't have like strength, or I don't have flowers on me, the flower one is saying I'm too delicate. So so the granny kind of explains them that you all have your unique strengths. So the exercise or the activity that we did was make a patchwork quilt of your own strengths. So this kid did it so beautifully. I'm just so in awe of how she has represented this, all her strengths, and some of her hobbies are also her strengths. So if I remember, like the smiley face is I'm always happy, I'm strong is depicted with the dumbbell. I like to travel the world. I like to play badminton. So all these, like, she basically like depicted her strengths. On the left is a dialogue. So we also encourage kids to write these dialogues from the stories that they've read. So in one of the stories on the right is this character named Thulli, and Thulli is a sprite that eats people's dreams. So with dialogue, the owl is kind of confronting Thulli, and the owl is saying, Thulli, you have to stop your behavior of eating people's dreams. So this is a 6-year-old kid who is thinking about conflict resolution and confrontation, and talking assertively. And then Thulli in response says, no, Ignis, this is the tastiest meal I've ever had. I'm never gonna stop eating these. So there's a funny angle to it. I'm just gonna have a sip of water. This is our main program, and this is called the story program, where we write stories for literacy, language development, and most importantly, social emotional learning, right? So we also write in levels, and it's a subscription service. So if you want to consider it, please join our WhatsApp group. We are relaunching next month. So this is a story about this bat named Chicky who learns about safety, right? So this is a bat, and I've just added 2 of the slides of the story. So she feels safe when she's with her mother in the dark night sky. So a place where she feels safe, and the person that she feels safe with, right? And she feels unsafe when she sees an eagle, right? So basically identifying that some people are unsafe through a story, right? So this helps a lot in affect labeling, and it also helps with visualizing and empathizing with the character. Now for the most interesting part, where you can actually like use these practical tips as to how to use a story for affect labeling and emotional regulation. Remember one thing, these stories are not for instructions. Whenever you read a story, don't instruct them. Don't ask them questions like, tell me what is the cloud feeling, tell me. Your voice is very important for co-regulation. Make sure when you're reading this story, you empathize with the cloud. You first tell yourself, oh, the cloud, gray cloud, is feeling sad today. See how it makes a difference? Now let me tell you another example. Give another example of what is instruction based. This is Chinnu. This is a gray cloud. What color is the cloud? Gray. So what's happening to Chinnu? He's feeling sad. Okay? This is not what you are. Don't do this. Okay? Let's move away from the education system that's been unfortunately given to us, and let's move into a more empathetic way of modeling and not teaching. Okay? So there's the difference, right? Chinnu, the grey cloud, is feeling sad today. I wonder what happened to Chinnu. He feels heavy. and his shoulders feel droopy. Oh no, have you ever felt like this? I felt like this when I went on a vacation and you weren't around. I felt so sad because you weren't there. Have you ever felt like this? This is such an interesting modeling strategy, right? You told your child that you were feeling sad and you gave an example. And now your desired outcome will come. Maybe don't expect, leave the expectations. Let your child surprise you with answers. Be curious about how your child feels emotions, because it might be different from how you feel the emotions. Might be very different, right? That's what you need to keep in mind. Model, don't teach. Be curious. Learn from your child. Learn how your child regulates and help them process their emotions. Don't project your emotions on them. The right answer is not what the parent is feeling. The child should feel the same. That's not the right answer. Don't tell them, oh, you were feeling what that day? What were you feeling that day? Don't do that. Okay. Let your child answer and then expand. All right. Let your child give some clues and then fill in the language for them. Right. And the best language is your own experience. Best expansion. Okay. So this is a parent. The son is kind of a parent. See how empathetic is the parent, is listening to the child. Aram se they're listening. Like the child is saying, the cloud is saying, I feel lonely and confused. This is affect labeling. The story is teaching them how to label their emotions. Whenever you're narrating this, pause and then name your emotions. So in affect labeling, we learned that you need to pause and label your affect, right? So that is what gives your prefrontal cortex, right? That's how it gets engaged and it sends calming signals to your amygdala. So, pause for a moment, give your brain some time to feel that affect, right? Pause and say, the cloud says, I'm so worried about the storm. Oh, Christ, And then you can also add some observations like, oh no, poor Chinnu, he's feeling so sad. He's crying. You can also ask reflective questions, like, what do you think Chinnu needs right now? What is happening in Chinnu's body? Where is Chinnu feeling the sadness, right? So I haven't added all the slides of the story. It's a little longer. It's like 10 slides, but just to give you an idea. So suddenly, Chinnu feels better because he talked about his sadness. So he feels like much better and more relaxed, and he takes a nap and he gets up and he feels rather active and much better and more self-aware. The opposite feeling of sadness is not happy. It's emotional regulation, more self-awareness, more in control. Because what happens is sadness and anxiety or fear, it kind of triggers the amygdala, right? So the goal is for the amygdala to stop being triggered, be calm. You can also use calm because after sadness, I don't think any kid can feel happy after a bout of sadness, So your goal should be calming the child down, making a child feel more in control and not happy. What how you can make them feel in control by naming and helping them co-regulate, probably reading them a story, not by giving them a chocolate, not by giving them the phone. Don't do that. That's why I said the opposite of dysregulation is calmness or regulation, not happiness. You don't want to make your child happy all the time. You want to make them feel in control of their feelings. That should be your goal as a parent. Because then what happens is the brain seeks validation. And that's how this social media likes and all this validation happens. And, if someone likes our photo, we feel, like they liked our photo. that's what happens then. So the goal for you should be emotional regulation and not happiness all the time, because nobody is capable of being happy all the time. That is a fact.